Hi, I'm Marty Kelsey, one of the hosts of STEM in 30, and welcome to a very special edition of the Air and Space Live Chat. It is my great honor and pleasure today to introduce Commander of Apollo 13, Captain Jim Lovell, as well as Dr. Teasel Muir-Harmony, Curator in the Space History Department of the National Air and Space Museum. Thank you both for being here today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so we've got a lot of questions already coming in. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can. Down in the comments section, let us know where you're watching from and what questions you have. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Captain Lovell, I'm going to start with you today. What is your favorite memory from Apollo 13?
My favorite memory of Apollo 13 is splashing in the Pacific Ocean and seeing it come across the window and knew that we had successfully come home.
Awesome. Dr. Muir-Harmony, tell us, why is Apollo 13 such an important story for the National Air and Space Museum to tell?
Well, Apollo 13 tells us a lot about why Apollo was a successful program in the first place. And sometimes you hear about it as a successful failure, but it taught us about the sort of ingenuity of everyone working on the program coming together, but also the importance of planning and training and expertise and making sure things were a success. So people were really prepared to take on those challenges. And I think that's an essential part of that history. And Apollo 13 demonstrates that in a number of different stories I'm sure we'll touch on today.
Awesome. Captain Lovell, we've got a question that came in. Somebody wants to know why you wanted to become an astronaut and, how did you first get involved in the space program?
Well, it's an interesting story. Years ago, when I was in high school and getting close to graduation, I could not have the money to go to college. But during high school, I read an interesting pamphlet by Dr. Goddard years ago. It was 1913, as a matter of fact, when he developed the liquid fuel rocket engine. And the story was, the pamphlet was actually called A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes. I was very much interested in that. I followed all the Germans' developments and after the World War II, and I really wanted to become a rocket engineer. I wrote to the American Rocket Society, and I said, how do I become a rocket engineer? They answered me back very nicely. They said, well, first of all, get a good education. And then they suggested that I go to either MIT or Caltech or something like that. Well, I couldn't afford to go to any of those colleges. And it was just fortunate at that time that the Navy needed naval aviators. And so there was a program of naval aviation that they would send high school graduates to college for 2 years, taking an engineering course. If they succeeded in that, they would send them down to Pensacola to get their flight training. And once they finished their flight training and spent about 6 months with a Navy squadron, they would send them back to the last 2 years of college. For me, it was perfect. I couldn't afford to go to college. This was the only way I could get in. I took it. I went down to University of Illinois for 2 years, or University of Wisconsin, I should say, for 2 years. And then I went to Pensacola for flight training. While I was there, the Navy, I got information from the Navy because I had applied for the Naval Academy too, but I was rejected the first time. And they said, if you're still interested in the Naval Academy, report to Annapolis. So after 2 years of college, I thought to myself, I better get my education while I can. I went back to Annapolis, started as a plebe, finished 4 years of the Naval Academy, and then went back to flight training. And then when I got into flight training, of course, I followed everything that we were doing in the space program. In 1957, I think I was at the test center. I had gone out to sea, and that's when NASA needed astronauts for the Mercury program. I applied for that program. I was just one of 32 who was accepted. I went out to get the NASA physical along with John Glenn and Alan Shepard and Wally Schirra. And of the 32 people who took that test, I was the only one to flunk. Hi, Billy Rubin. I was very much disappointed. Went back to the test center, never told the Navy that I flunked the thing. And then a couple of years later, NASA needed more astronauts, the Gemini program. The Navy called me up and said, look, they're asking for test pilot candidates or test pilot people that had that training. Are you still interested? And I said, yes, I am. And so I did. I went back for my physical again with NASA. I passed with no problem whatsoever, and I joined the Gemini program. And that's how the whole thing started.
Awesome. Dr. Muir-Harmony, how did you end up being in charge of the Apollo collection for the National Air and Space Museum?
A lot of luck and also a lot of school as well. I had an interest in the history of astronomy and space exploration from a very young age, and I studied it and got internships, and was lucky enough actually to meet Captain Lovell. I was telling him 12 years ago when I worked at the Adler Planetarium, and then went on to study the history of science and technology, and with a focus on space exploration in graduate school, and happened to focus on Apollo too. And then was lucky enough that the position for the Apollo collection came up just around the same time that I was looking for a position. So it was a lot of luck, a lot of training, preparation, combination
Awesome.
of those factors. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, for all of those of you watching, we've got people watching from all over the place. I'm going to run through a few shout outs here. Michigan, North Carolina, Tennessee, New Hampshire, Kansas City, New York, the UK, Nebraska, Florida, Athens, Greece, Alaska, Virginia, Minnesota. We've got all of them covered, including Bolivia and the Czech Republic. Keep letting us know where you guys are watching from, and put those comments and questions down in the comments section. If you're watching today, you may notice that Captain Lovell's box looks a little bit different. We had our own round peg and a square hole moment this morning, and so we've had some technical issues, but the guys working behind the scenes in our mission control have been doing an awesome job and getting us ready to go. We've got a question here from Chloe and Cal, and they want to know, Captain Lovell, could you see the stars more clearly when you were going around behind the moon?
Well, we saw the stars when the moon was in shadow. In other words, when we didn't see the moon, and in fact, we went into orbit on Apollo 8, for instance, without even knowing where the moon was because we couldn't see it. And at that time, the stars were very brilliant and shining. As soon as we got around to where the sun came around from the horizon, and the backside of the moon was illuminated, then the stars disappeared.
Awesome. And Dr. Muir-Harmony, maybe you can weigh on this one. We've got a question wanting to know about the hidden figures, and were they still doing trajectory calculations during Apollo 13?
I believe that they were all working around this time. I don't know the details of the three women in particular. I know Katherine Johnson helped work on the trajectory of Apollo 11, and I imagine she was also involved in 13, but unfortunately, I don't know the specifics for this mission.
All right, great. We've got, let's see, we've got a 9-year-old working on a presentation about Captain Lovell, and he wanted to know, what would you like people to know about you that maybe we don't already know?
Well, I don't know. I was an Eagle Scout early. I was in the space program for an early time. And I really enjoyed my career in space. I was a Eagle Scout, which helped for anybody who was a young boy should look at that. And I was very satisfied with my career so far. And I hope that people, young people, and even older people, take advantage of, that if you put your mind to it, if you really want to do something, it will usually come true.
All right, we've got another question for Captain Lovell. If you were to get into the command module or lunar module simulator now, do you think you could still fly them?
That's a good question. I wouldn't bet my life on it, but I still have some of the paperwork showing the command and service module and the lunar module back in my basement, and I look at them occasionally.
Dr. Muir-Harmony, you said earlier you had a couple of questions for Captain Lovell. What do you got?
I do. So coming from the Smithsonian, we're very interested in artifacts, objects that tell stories about the history of spaceflight. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about some of the artifacts that you think were really significant from the mission, some of your favorite artifacts.
Well, I brought back some artifacts from the Apollo 13 mission. My outer helmet is one. The space gloves was another. I took there was a plaque that when we landed on the moon on the 13, I put this plaque on one of the struts. And since we didn't land, the plaque was still in the spacecraft, and I took it back too. The things that I missed, I was going to leave a little something for my wife, and that didn't occur, but I did prior to actually Apollo 8, look at a little triangular mountain around the moon, and they called it Mount Maryland, and it was a good point that we could look at, a good observation point. And so I saw it both on Apollo 8 and Apollo 13.
All right, we've got a question I think applies well to both of you. A kid wants to know if they wanted to start a career in space, what would you recommend? Where do they get started?
Well, it depends on how old you are. I think get a good education, both, especially at college. Go to an engineering college, one that maybe specializes in things of space nature. And I'm sure you'd find a good job in the aerospace industry.
Dr. Muir-Harmony, how about you? What advice would you have?
Very similar advice. I think education is probably key there, and pursuing a field related to space exploration that you're really excited about and willing to put in a lot of long hours and devote yourself to. And then look for a lot of opportunities, because there are internships and volunteer positions and various ways that you can get involved and learn a bit more about various dimensions of space exploration. For me, as a historian of spaceflight, I get to think about these questions, these missions every day, but it's a very different experience than building a rocket at NASA. So there are lots of different ways that you can be involved in this field.
All right, we've got a student from California. They're 8 years old, and Captain Lovell, they want to know what the Gforces felt like.
Well, the Gforces on the Apollo spacecraft, the Saturn V, were actually quite comfortable. The only G-force that was really bad was coming back in on the command module when we hit the atmosphere again. But on the flight of the booster was not anything more than about 4 Gs, and that was only momentarily after we shut down the third stage.
Dr. Muir-Harmony, we've got a question here. Somebody wants to know, what object would you like to collect that didn't make it back to Earth?
I think probably the lithium hydroxide canister adapter would be a wonderful artifact to have. So at the museum, we have a mock-up of it that was built for us by engineers in mission control who came up with the solution initially. But it would have been wonderful if Captain Lovell would have been able to bring that back with him. He had many other more important things on his mind. But that's one of the artifacts I would have loved to collect.
Awesome. We've got...
We dare not take that back because it was still dioxide in the little until we finally got out of it.
Yes, it's for the best.
All right, we've got Kenny, who is a scout, and he wants to know what your Eagle Scout project was, Captain Lovell.
Hey, that's a good question. I got my Eagle Scout in 1943. And I don't think at that time we had actually missions, but I think I worked with the church doing some project, and I don't recall right now, but that was a long time ago.
Dr. Muir-Harmony, have you ever? A student wants to know: have you ever wanted to apply to become an astronaut?
No, I'm afraid of heights, and I don't think I'd be a very good astronaut. I love being a historian, and I love studying the history of space exploration, but I never had it in me to be an astronaut.
Sam, who's 8 years old, wants to know, Captain Lovell, were you scared?
Let's say I was apprehensive. Yes, when the explosion occurred, we actually didn't know what happened. So it was too early to be scared because we were trying to figure out, is it serious or is it not serious? And of course, as soon as I looked out the window and saw our oxygen escaping and our fuel cells dead, because that's where we got our electricity from, then yes, the apprehension turned into, boy, are we going to get back home again, or what's happening, or what can we do? But we kept that to ourselves, and we were actually prepared to look at one crisis at a time. And once we got a crisis, we try to fill it out, figure out what to do and what to do. And of course, the major solution after we saw all the oxygen escaping was the fact that we had to use it, had to use the lunar module as a lifeboat to get home. And so that was in conjunction with the ground. Very fortunately, we had communication with mission control. We all agreed that the command module was dying, and we'd go into the lunar module and see if we could use it somehow as a lifeboat to get home.
Okay. And this is a question that I think can apply to both of you. Captain Lovell, did you notice anything different on the moon between Apollo 8 and Apollo 13?
That's a good question. No, I did not. I of course, on Apollo 8, we were around it for many times, and so we had a good look at both the backside and the near side. 13, we didn't even go around it. We went around it, but we didn't circle it at all. And so I didn't see anything any different.
All right. Dr. Muir-Harmony, when you look at artifacts from the different Apollo missions, can you see differences in how the technology improved?
There were some refinements, but a lot of what improved from, say, 11 to 13 was our knowledge about the systems. And so one of my favorite stories is during Apollo 11, they actually used the lunar module to test out how long the spacecraft could last without water cooling the instrument. So after they no longer needed it, they kept it running with the water turned off. And then they were able to use that knowledge for Apollo 13 to estimate, how long are we going to be okay with this limited amount of water. So it was the same technology. It was just more knowledge based on some experimentation from earlier flights.
Cool. All right, we've got Jack 8, who is a Cub Scout from Indiana, and he wants to know, Captain Lovell, were you disappointed to not finish the Apollo 13 mission as planned, or proud that you were able to overcome all the obstacles?
Well, I have to answer that question for both. I was very much disappointed in the landing on the moon, but the fact that we took an almost project or situation that was very, very difficult to correct. And yes, I'm very happy that we did get home safely, and that working closely with mission control and trying to solve one problem after another was something I'm very proud of.
All right, we've got a question here. During the broadcast on Apollo 13, you used a Sony TC50 cassette player. Somebody wants to know about the music that you listened to, and did you ever record voice memos on it?
We never recorded anything with our voice, but we did have music on it, and I'm trying to think of what it was. You caught me unawares. Very popular music at the time, but I forget about it now. But there was one question. I don't know if it's going to come up from the audience or not. But what's the significance? The significance of the explosion occurring at the time it did?
Go for it. We've got so many questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. You guys are doing a great job. And again, people watching from all across the country. So Captain Lovell, do you want to answer that one?
I'll answer that one. The explosion occurred at just the right time that allowed us to use the lunar module to go around the moon and come back again. If it exploded earlier, just after we took off to go to the moon, we would never had enough oxygen and electrical power and water in the lunar module to make it all the way around the moon and come back home again. If the explosion occurred after we got into lunar orbit, or heaven forbid on the lunar surface, well, then Mission Control would have to have a bad time trying to figure out why they left two guys there on the moon.
Dr. Muir-Harmony, we've got a couple of questions coming in about the tape player. Do we know what happened to that cassette player?
I don't off the top of my head. It's a great question, but I'll look into it.
Okay, we'll put that in the comments here. Yeah. Captain Lovell, could you describe what splashdown felt like?
Yes, in fact, splashdown was different for my two flights. Apollo 8, it was a sudden bump because we hit flat. The wave of the ocean and the bottom of our spacecraft, the flat end where the heat shield is, hit in a flat motion, and so it was quite a jump. At 13, we sliced very nicely on the edge of our spacecraft, so the hit in the ocean was very nice.
Awesome.
I've heard that a lot of water rained down on you because of all the condensation during the mission. Was it really noticeable? Is this something that you remember about the landing?
No, there was a lot of water in the command module because it was so cold that water was coming out of the atmosphere. So things were forming on the heat shield, not on the heat shield, but on the instrument panel on the sides. And we were worried about the fact that that might short out something. And so when we were turning on the command module coming home, getting all ready, we were worried that something would short out, but fortunately nothing did.
All right, we've got a question here from Jacoby and Colton, and they want to know if you keep in touch with any of the other astronauts and if you've got any good stories about any of the other astronauts.
Well, not on the flight we didn't. We were by ourselves at Mission Control. But over the years, we'd all get together to discuss our various flights. And of course, there was a lot of discussion on Apollo 13.
All right. Dr. Muir-Harmony, you've gotten a chance to meet one of the other Apollo 13 astronauts, right?
I have, yes. Been very lucky.
Cool. All right. So a question from a 10-year-old in London, and she wants to know, Captain Lovell, were you always an adventurer?
Well, I guess so. I being a Boy Scout and doing a lot of work, during the Scout programs, going to camps and things like that, then going into naval aviation and flying off aircraft carriers. And then, of course, going to test pilot school and then being a test pilot for the Navy. And then eventually ended up with the space program. I guess I led sort of an adventurous career.
And you're talking about the Navy. We've got a lot of questions coming in about what your favorite airplane to fly was.
Mine was the Phantom, the F-4H. I did a lot of test work on that plane when it first came out to the Navy.
All right. Dr. Muir-Harmony, Sophia and Natalie want to know about astronaut equipment for women. I know there was some stuff in the news a while back, but also, just tell us a little bit about astronaut equipment for women.
Well, it has been developed over time, and I think we still have a ways to go. And hopefully, with more and more women who are now astronauts, those systems will be improved. But it's taken a while, even after women join the astronaut corps, for us to build a technology that's appropriate for women's bodies and the different ways that they're shaped. And so. But hopefully by the time women go to the moon, their spacesuits will fit well and they'll have all the personal equipment they need.
All right, we've got a question here about the Aquarius and Odyssey. Where did those names come from?
Well, I'm the owner, I guess, of naming those the spacecraft. Of course, Odyssey is natural. Odyssey is a long journey with many changes of fortune, which was just a natural for the command module. Aquarius came from that period of time when that famous show at Broadway was going on, and the song Aquarius came up. And Aquarius also is, I think, had something to do with Egypt and the people there, some of their goddess or something like that. So I thought Aquarius was a very nice name for the lunar module.
Awesome.
I have a follow-up question for that, if that's all right. So with Odyssey, there's also the connection to Arthur C. Clarke and 2001 Space Odyssey, which came out around the same time. And I know that you were a fan of science fiction as a child, and I wondered if you had seen the film or read the book and the connection between your Odyssey and Arthur C. Clarke.
No, I'm afraid I didn't. I didn't do that. But my thoughts about Odyssey was the fact of meaning of it a long time ago.
Cool. All right, we've got a bunch of questions coming in about the movie, and people want to know how accurate was it, and what role did you play in it, Captain Lovell?
The movie actually was very accurate. Ron Howard got the book, and he tried to follow the book as close as possible. I had a brief role in the movie. I was the captain of the ship that recovered Apollo 13.
And Dr. Muir-Harmony, what are your thoughts on the movie?
I think it's remarkably accurate. If people all the time ask me for recommendations for space movies, and this is my favorite, and it does an incredible job of representing that story. And what's amazing is if you read Captain Lovell's book, you'll realize that they went through even more challenges than are covered in the movie. In the movie, you think, how can they have anything else arise as a problem? But if you read about the mission, if you read his book, if you read some of the transcripts, you'll see that they had to deal with even more than is depicted.
Cool. Captain Lovell, somebody wants to know if you're ready to take a trip to the International Space Station.
Well, if they invite me, of course, I'm 92 years old. I went up into space when he was quite old, so yeah, I guess I'm still in good shape.
All right. Was there ever consideration for performing a spacewalk to inspect the damage?
No, we never thought about that. As a matter of fact, it would be very, very difficult to do. We'd have to open up the hatch of the command module, and that was not really acceptable. And so we decided that that was not even thought about too much.
All right. Let's see. Connor and Caden want to know what advice you would both give to a future generation getting ready to go explore Mars.
Well, if I should answer first, I think that if anybody who's going to explore Mars, we better do a good exploration of the moon. My thoughts are that the present programs for NASA should be a continuation of moon flights to get a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, and get the infrastructure to go from the Earth to the moon very comfortably without really worrying about it. Once we got to that stage, then take that same technology and expand it to go to the moon, or go to Mars, I should say, because I think that we have not really touched the moon as much as we really should, both for exploration and also more by technology and getting the comfortable feeling that we can do that without problems.
Okay. Dr. Muir-Harmony, how about you?
I think there's also this additional dimension of being so far away from Earth and being isolated and encountering these risks again and again and again. I mean, spaceflight is extremely risky, and if you were to travel somewhere like Mars, you're putting yourself at significant risk constantly. And so I think you have to be very psychologically prepared for that, and also the isolation that's involved. So that's an important part of preparing as well.
Okay. We've got a question here. What adjustments or changes were made to the Apollo capsule and the Apollo program after Apollo 13?
Well, of course, we inspected carefully what the problem was. And the problem was twofold. There was sort of a miscalculation. Early in 1965, NASA, or the manufacturer, I forget which one, had told the manufacturer of the liquid oxygen tank to replace the 28-volt thermostats with 65-volt thermostats that were compatible with 65-volt power, because out on the launch site, there was a 65-volt power available in case they had to use it, rather than turning on the power of the spacecraft. That was not done, unfortunately. Second thing that happened was the oxygen tank was dropped just prior to delivery to NASA at the factory. Well, they picked it up and checked it for everything that they had to do to make sure that it would work in flight, and they checked out okay. But there was a second function of that oxygen tank, that was to remove liquid oxygen after a routine test, and that was not checked. But that was also damaged in that drop, and the hosing, the hose that to do that, I guess somehow was damaged. Now let's go 2 weeks before the flight. We did a last test called the countdown demonstration test, and this was a test that to see that everything would work perfectly on the countdown and the launch. Everything was successful, but when the crew went back in to secure the spacecraft, and they tried to remove the oxygen from the damaged liquid oxygen tanks. And by the way, it was originally scheduled, that tank was originally scheduled for Apollo 12, but it was delayed in delivery, so it went to 13. When they tried to remove the oxygen, they couldn't do it because that system in that tank had failed. And so they decided to turn on the 65-volt power at the launch site to turn on the little heater system in the oxygen tank and boil the oxygen out. Normally that had been fine, because if it was protected at 65-volt thermostats, the thermostats would turn off the power when the temperature got up to about 80 degrees. But the thermostats were only compatible with 28-volt power, and therefore when the temperature got up to about 80 degrees, those thermostats opening, they started to open up to secure the power and shut it off. They were welded together, and from then on we had no protection in that tank. We know now that tank pressure or temperature got it to about 200 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit in that tank. Boiled out all the liquid oxygen. There was no problem with that at all. But it damaged the wiring system in that tank. It took away all the recovery, the covers of the wires, and exposed them all to a possible explosion. But nothing happened during that test. Nothing happened at all. All the oxygen was removed, and the tank looked perfectly normal. The spacecraft was secured. The day before launch, we again filled the tank up with liquid oxygen, and from then on, it was a bomb waiting to go off. And it exploded 200,000 miles out on April 13th.
Wow. Dr. Muir-Harmony, can you talk a little bit about how, Captain Lovell was talking about all of these different parts. Those came from all across the country, right?
They did. So there were about 20,000 contractors and subcontractors working on Apollo. It was a huge effort in coordination. That's one of the sort of remarkable parts of the story, not only reaching the moon, but also coordinating a workforce of hundreds of thousands of people working throughout the country in all different types of industry. So that was part of the tricky coordination effort. But there were modifications made to those oxygen tanks after the mission, an incredibly thorough report, and you can see it online if you're interested. You Google it. NASA has made it available as a PDF online, so you can really get into the details. But important modifications were made in the oxygen tanks after the mission.
Awesome.
And then they also added things like additional water to have on board.
Cool. I want to share a comment with both of you. We got somebody commented that they have been listening to the Apollo in real time for the last 6 days. And every morning their 12-year-old gets up and asks, what are they doing? Following along with everything. And they wanted to let you all know that it's been a very, that mission is still an inspiration today. So I wanted to pass that along to you, Captain Lovell. And then we've got a question here. Many people look up to you. Who do you look up to, Captain Lovell?
Actually, I looked up to Charles Lindbergh. You have to remember that he flew, what, in 1927? I was born in 1928, and at that time, during my early childhood, we were all interested in airplanes, and we built model airplanes, and we all liked to see, what he had done. And I met him just prior to the launch of Apollo 8. He and his wife came down and had breakfast with the crew, and so I've read his books, and so that's who I admired.
Wow, what was Charles Lindbergh like?
Well, the time I met him, it was really a fine guy. And as a matter of fact, when I had my problem on 13, he was in the Philippines doing some studies on the people that were there. He had a helicopter that helped him, and during my flight, he would take the helicopter high so he can read or listen to the radio stations in Manila, and find out what was going on with Apollo 13. And after the flight was over, a couple of weeks later, when I got home, I got a very nice letter.
That is awesome. Dr. Muir-Harmony, what is your favorite artifact? Hannah, who's 11 years old, wants to know.
Oh, that's so hard. And I change the answer all the time, which is, I don't know if it's a good sign or a bad sign. But one of the artifacts, I like the artifacts that are a little surprising, maybe things that you would do not expect as much. But one of the great artifacts from the Apollo 13 mission is Gene Kranz's vest, white vest. And it tells a wonderful story about mission control and the importance of teamwork. Gene Kranz's wife, he was the flight director in mission control, and his wife would make him these vests, and they were part of the white team, so they were white vests during the mission, and they were used as a way to, get people to feel connected and inspired. And then at every success, after the missions ended and there was a success, he would wear a vest with lots of colors on it, a little bit more celebratory. But the one from 13, because that mission was a question and at risk the whole time, he wore his white vest. And I think that's such a special artifact in the collection. It's one of my favorites because it tells a lot of different stories in one artifact. And so the artifacts that can do that are tend to be my favorite.
Awesome. Captain Lovell, we've got a question from John, and he wants to know if you would do it again.
That was 50 years ago, John. I think the younger group start to think about going back into space.
Was there a reason that the Apollo 13 mission patch didn't have the crew names on it?
What do you mean the crew names on it? All the flights had the crew names. I've got that question wrong. I'm sorry. Did you put any stock into 13 being an unlucky number? Now that's a good question. That is a good question. When I got assigned, I was originally assigned to Apollo 14, and then the NASA figured that Al Shepard needed a little bit more training because he had been down for a while. And so I got home and I said to my wife, Marilyn, hey, I just got moved up to Apollo 13. And she says, Apollo 13? Why that number? I said it kept before 12, as it was in the movie. But 13 has sort of plagued us for the longest time. Just think about it. We took off on Apollo 13, on 1313 Central Standard Time. The spacecraft, the explosion occurred on 13, April 13. And we came back, and but fortunately we were successful. But now, 50 years later, when we're all set to really celebrate 50 years after Apollo 13, here comes the coronavirus.
So do you have
Good point.
Do you have any advice for, everybody feels kind of locked in and claustrophobic in their homes, but you spent quite a while in a very small space. Do you have any advice for everybody?
Yeah, I really had some small time in of course, Gemini 7 with them.
Yeah.
Just have to get used to it. Just look out the windows, find a good spot, and read a good book.
When you were going 20,000 miles an hour, was there a sensation of that speed?
Now, in spaceflight, going to the moon or back, or just going around the Earth, there is no really sensation or feeling of speed. There's no wind rushing, across the vehicle. And there's just, in fact, the spaceflight is actually very comfortable if you have enough room to enjoy it. The lunar module got to be kind of small for 3 guys, but there's no body weight that you had to have. I mean, you can float around. You can just pass things easily between people. They just float from one person to another. The only problem is that your muscles get out of tone quite quickly, and I found that out when I got on board the aircraft carriers.
Elise wants to know: have either one of you read Harry Potter?
No, unfortunately, I haven't read that book.
I am currently reading that to my kids, and they're enjoying it. So if you're looking for a good one, that's a good one. Also, Lost Moon or Apollo 13 is a great book. I encourage that. And Dr. Muir-Harmony, you had a couple of recommendations as well, right?
I did. Well, Captain Lovell's book about Apollo 13 is up there on the top of the list, and Gene Kranz's book, Failure is Not an Option, is another fantastic book if you're interested in this topic. I also highly recommend going to the Apollo 13 in real time website and following along with the flight. There's a great podcast out just now from BBC called 13 Minutes to the Moon. And the second season focuses on Apollo 13. It's really fantastic. So it's another good resource.
Cool. Captain Lovell, what legacy do you want this mission, Apollo 13, to leave behind for future generations?
Well, I think the legacy of 13 is that if you're confronted with a problem, a crisis, that you first of all have to have a positive attitude. Look at it from a positive point of view. Don't suddenly say I can't do anything and take that approach. For instance, if we just did nothing but coal up waiting for a miracle to happen on 13, we'd still be up there. So everything in life has to have solutions to it. And after that flight, I've had a couple minor crises after, but my flight on 13 has really helped me to take care of them without a problem.
Awesome. All right. Well, my co-host Beth is wearing a very special shirt today, and she wants to jump in and ask the last question today.
So I have my official Apollo 13 Failure is Not an Option shirt on today. Captain Lovell, can you tell us about mission control and how important their job is?
Well, of course, mission control, especially in 13, well, all the flights, I would say, is very, very important. And you need good leadership, which was there. You had good motivation. The fact of figuring out how to get rid of the carbon dioxide, that was very, very good observations and use in their head. And so teamwork is very important. There was a great teamwork between mission control and the flight crew. And thinking out of the in some way that never give up. And I think that whole team with Gene Kranz and team and working carefully with the three of us made almost certain catastrophe into a successful failure.
Awesome. Well, Captain Lovell and Dr. Muir-Harmony, thank you all so much for joining us today. We want to encourage everybody to tune in tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern time. There is an Apollo 13 film live chat that will be hosted by Dr. Margaret Weidekamp, and we'll have Jeffrey Kluger on there. They'll be taking your questions. That's on YouTube Live. And then we want to encourage everybody to tune in next week. We have a live chat talking about Artemis, which is the next program to the moon that'll land the first woman to walk on the moon and the next man. And we'll be talking to NASA astronaut Randy Comrade Bresnik. We encourage you to tune in and thank everybody for watching. Dr. Muir-Harmony and Captain Lovell, thank you again so much for a great conversation today.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.